Hi, Kayla.
Oh,
I'm Dr. Connie, and we're here today to celebrate your new book, The Book of Shadow Work, and really explore. There you go. And we're going to spend some time exploring together what this experience is like for you and what the book is about. So, how is celebrating the release of this new book for you? What are you experiencing?
thanks, Connie. So, celebrating this book feels like watching a dream take flight. And it was very symbolic when I was at the airport on my way to New York to meet my publishers for the launch. Watching the airplane go up, that kind of energy felt like what I was embodying in the moment and living in the moment. And this is a dream that's rooted not just in my own personal story, but in the collective longing for this deeper self-awareness and healing. This book, I hope, serves as a mirror for people to look within, to start an ongoing conversation and dialogue with themselves. So I hope that when people pick this up, it looks shiny and it's a little gem in the corner, but I hope that when people pick this book up, they allow themselves to almost hold it as a handheld mirror to face their own soul and really look within. A lot of what is inside of the book is a culmination of years of introspection and continuous learning and just listening to people's voices all around the world who have walked the path of shadow work. So I hope that it really inspires others to start their path, start their journey into this practice, and be curious about understanding themselves.
That's beautiful, Kayla. It's a really beautiful dream. And the launch was like a jet plane.
Yeah,
It's true. It's up there now in the skies and it's flying into people's hands.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yours as well. I'm happy that you read it.
Yeah, into my hands as well. So let's talk about, we've set up a lot of different definitions and basic fundamental understandings already in our conversations on Substack and in our earlier books. Let's go a little deeper for our listeners today. What's the connection between shadow work and spirituality for you?
That is a beautiful question. And I don't think there's one way to answer it, but personally, shadow work is a deeply spiritual practice because it invites you to confront the full spectrum of your humanity. And I say spectrum because literally I have a spectrum behind me, and I think it's a beautiful way to look at ourselves as well because our humanness is not limited to our physical bodies and our biologies. There's a divine dimension to our being and to our aliveness and how we carry ourselves in the world as human beings. It's not just with our bodies, it's with our spirits, with our hearts, with our internal intentions. Carl Jung spoke of the numinous experiences as those profound and awe-inspiring moments that feel sacred or mysterious or deeply moving and unexplainable. In these moments, I think everyone experiences in life, and it's based on something that is us tied to something greater than ourselves. And that reminds us of the interconnectedness of all things, us, the world around us, our environment, and beyond. Shadow work connects us with our spiritual lives by helping bridge the gap between our human imperfections and our divine potential, because we must go through the depths and the tunnel and the darkness and the void of fears and illusions and doubts and pain in order to reach our greater capacity for courage, our capacity to hold light, to hold truth, and our capacity for compassion and awareness. I think there are many ways to answer that because everyone's experience of spirituality is different, but going through the depths, going through the shadows, I think encourages us to face the light and to question what the divine means to us.
I love that. I think, many people make this separation between the dark and the light.
Mm.
It's really a false split.
Yeah.
and that shadow work is spiritual work
It
in
is.
the sense that it connects us to what's greater than ourselves, both psychologically and spiritually. I mean, the personal unconscious and the collective unconscious, and
Mhm.
also the transpersonal center in all of us, whatever we call that, whatever name we give to that,
Yeah.
whether we call it spirit or self or consciousness. Shadow work can actually connect us with that essential part of ourselves.
Yeah.
And it's the shadow parts, the shadow characters that block that connection. So when we learn these practices, we can actually have a deeper spiritual experience
Yeah.
in meditation or in ritual or in prayer. So that's beautiful. I love that you're emphasizing that.
Mhm.
It's really important for me as well. Let's talk about shadow work and relationships a little bit, because this is where so many people struggle. There's so much triggering and reactivity and pain with the people we love the most. How can we frame that? How can we frame conflict in relationships in this larger context of shadow work?
So, chapter 5 in the book of shadow work dives deep into the shadow and intimate relationships. So, when we understand what our personal shadows are, we can then stop the blame, stop the finger pointing and projections, and start communicating and choosing a pause, a moment in between when we react versus when we decide to respond. This book dives deep into how we can create and support relationships that are very important in our lives, and seeing relationships as not about completing each other, but about witnessing and supporting each other's growth and expanding our capacity for each other as well, because we are all individual by nature and we develop and grow within romantic relationships. So it also explores the nature of growth.
Yeah, for me, when I kind of realized how the shadow is leading us around by the nose in dating, it's kind of determining who we're attracted to and who we're not attracted to. Those unconscious pushes and pulls are really from the personal unconscious. And then we choose someone. And so often with my clients, the very thing they were drawn to becomes the very thing that turns them off and the issue that creates the most discomfort in the relationship. Then, exactly what you said, we end up projecting and blaming. And if we get lost in the blame game, 60% of people get divorced these days. We
Mm,
don't have tools to communicate in a way that's accountable for
right.
our own shadows and our own projections. Why am I blaming him? Is it really about him or is it really about me? So that chapter is important, I think, for people who are struggling. And
Mhm.
it can be with a parent too, or even with a child or a friend. We meet the shadow in those relationships as well as with our partners. So this is a really essential tool, I think, for people who want conscious relationships.
Yes, conscious relationships are key because we often want to portray our best selves or not our whole selves, especially in the process of going about looking for a mate. This explores the shadow and intimate relationships when you're in the beginning stages of developing romantic relationships and also when you are deeply into a relationship. 'Cause there are very different shadows that can come up in both.
So what do you mean by the social shadow?
The social shadow is the collective unconscious at play within society. These can look like the fears and the biases and the repressed truths that we bury as a culture. So we see this in like our systems and our systemic issues, for example, racism and sexism or environmental neglect. And we can see these things so clearly in our world today. And these are not just isolated problems, but mirrors of things that we refuse to address collectively. So, doing social shadow work asks us to question the narratives that we uphold and the biases that we hold and the inequalities that we perpetuate onto our world. And there are collective values as well that we tend to prioritize depending on where we live in the world. So, there's a lot of collective shadows that we can begin to look at together. to create a society rooted in accountability. That's a huge pillar in the social shadow, is to take on the accountability as a collective and to also be compassionate, because in our social issues, if we're passionate and fiery enough about them, they can lead to aggression, but we must look at these collective shadows with compassion to find real, authentic, healthy ways for change in our worlds.
And I think sometimes authentic anger is okay
Mhm.
in terms of social justice issues,
Yeah.
because that can fuel us. For people who want to be activists, that can really fuel our social shadow work. I think what's important is to remember not to project
Yeah.
and make enemies and create more us and them
Hmm.
as we do that work. But what I like about that chapter is you really expanded from personal, internal shadow work
Hmm.
into the collective world and explored how this practice can have meaningful impact for larger society.
Yeah, once we find a way to start with ourselves, to start with one, just the effect that it has on you can translate out into the relationships that you have with the people around you. With that awareness, it can trickle out onto communities and organizations. And so by just bringing this practice into your own personal world and expanding from there, that can make a huge difference.
You can bring it into your church or your sangha and change the institutions. You can bring it into the school system and change the curriculum, right? Wherever you live, you can bring these tools.
I'm starting to do a shadow cleanse with my group of friends here in Austin. Next time we meet up, we're going to kind of incorporate this as our little collective and create a ceremony and let our shadows out, let the burdens, the things that are weighing on us out. And hopefully we leave that experience lighter and more, whole.
I kind of see that as the purpose of Halloween. And
Mm.
also Purim. In Judaism, Purim is also about
Oh,
releasing shadow stuff. So there
yeah.
have been some societies, and I'm sure there's others,
Hmm.
that have institutionalized what you're saying.
Yeah.
Let's kind of ritualize this and do it collectively.
Shared, there's like an added layer of compassion and
Mhm.
understanding, both for the
Mhm.
people around you and yourself.
That's beautiful. And let's talk about the shadow of technology.
Yes, this chapter 7, the technological shadow, it is one of my favorite chapters, really, and one of the chapters that a lot of people highlight when they come back to me after reading the book. So, the shadow of technology really lies in its double-edged nature. It connects us and offers us endless possibilities in this connection, this endless, infinite space where you can constantly connect and engage with each other. But this also amplifies the disconnection, the comparison, and the superficiality that people can hold online. And social media is a very key example of this. And it often does magnify our insecurities and distracts us from this meaningful introspection, because we're constantly looking for the external for validation. We're constantly comparing. It's the space it has been fostered for in a way and grown into. Even when we look into the algorithms of social media, how that can portray and point us towards our collective shadow as well as our individual shadow when we go to our own feeds and scroll through and see what kind of stream of information is being shown to us. So, shadow work in technology involves us recognizing when technology serves as a tool versus when it becomes a mask. So, it's really important to ask yourself, how can you use technology to deepen your connections rather than to dilute your connections? Because it is a tool, but it is also a weapon, and so many people are using it in these different ways. So it's almost this battle of good and not bad, but us and them. So
It's really being used to weaponize shadow projection now in so many ways. And because the tech guys are not wanting to moderate it or control it in any way,
Well,
There's some really ugly stuff online that's been going on for the last few years. So, as great a gift as technology is, it also has a dark side.
it does. And it's only exponentially developing and growing. So that's another side of technology that I explore in the book of Shadow Work with the rise of AI and this super intelligence. What does that mean for us?
So, let's close with just kind of an overview of the promises of shadow work, the possibilities for people who really want to engage this practice.
And shadow work is a very beautiful practice. And I think the promise of shadow work is freedom. I always come back to the sense of freedom and liberation, not from the pain, not from the darkness, but a freedom to live authentically and rooted in compassion. And it promises a greater sense of awareness of self. It promises emotional resilience and a deeper sense of connection to ourselves and to others. And by learning to dance with our shadows versus wrestle with them, we can stop feeling like we're being controlled by them. And we start finding a shadow flow, which is a term Connie has in one of her books that you introduced to me, finding this shadow flow in life to learn how to work with our shadows and learn their lessons and wisdom, because that's a big promise in our shadow work practice as well. There will always be a shadow. You'll never erase it or avoid it entirely or dissolve it entirely. It doesn't offer us a quick fix or a perfect life, but it does promise a more honest life rooted in what truth we hold in ourselves and a meaningful life. Because our shadows can also point us towards what we value the most in our lives.
Beautiful. Thank you, Kayla. I would agree both in terms of my personal shadow work and my professional clinical work that this is an essential practice for people who want deep self-knowledge and conscious relationships and a spiritual connection. So thank you so much for helping to spread the word. It's really wonderful.
Thank you for taking the time to read the book and ask me these very thought-provoking questions. I hope that there are other people curious enough to dive in and dive deep and use this as a starting place for their shadow work journey.
And our conversation will continue.
Yes, to be continued. Dot,
Yeah.
dot, dot.